Well, today on the Faith Film Fan Podcast, I have a dear friend. He's also a filmmaker, and we're talking about his film, but above and beyond filmmaker and all of these other things, he is my close dear friend. I am so thrilled to have Tim Mahoney with us. Tim, welcome to the show.
Well, Rick, it's so good to be on this program, and we have a history. And you have been a real blessing by helping me with actually telling my own personal story. And I had not planned on being revealing any of that, but you asked some questions that brought me into my own personal life, and that was the film called The Journey Home. And I have to say, some people think it's the most important film that I've ever made.
Wow.
Well, but I didn't make it. You made it, but I was in it.
That's awesome. We'll just leave that there.
Yeah.
We won't go any further on that one. But no, that was a great privilege and joy to work with you. Plus, we're friends. You know, we were friends first, and now I'm so thrilled and excited to talk about The American Miracle. It's going to be in theaters June 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's a Fathom event. You can get ticket information by going to AmericanMiracleMovie.com. So, Tim, talk to me about, for someone who might not know what this is, obviously we're talking about George Washington and the miracles surrounding founding of America. Talk to me about how you came into this project, kind of a bird's eye view of what it is, what the project is, and how you got involved.
Yes. Well, Michael Medved has actually written a book called The American Miracle, and that came out in 2016. And it was a New York Times best-selling book. And Michael and I were friends through the Patterns of Evidence films, and he was in the very first one. And he had been approached to actually turn it into something. He wasn't sure what it would be, a TV show or whatever. And then he thought of me because of the fact that we had worked together. And you know, one of the areas that you have to do when you work together with someone is you have to trust that you're going to like what they do. And fortunately, Michael said, you know, he trusted me, and that's what's interesting is he's a film critic, so he was on, you know, Sneak Peek or whatever it was on PBS for a number of years. And so when a film critic writes a book and then asks you to make a film about it, that's a really kind of dangerous place to go. But fortunately, he loves it. And it's the story of the providential hand of God guiding events that are recorded in history, documented from multiple points of view, from the British and the Americans. And The American Miracle, the subtitle is Our Nation is No Accident. Rick, the word providence means the presence of God, and that there's a presence of God that came into these situations and time after time saved the Americans from being destroyed by the British.
So for those who don't know, Tim is responsible for the film series Patterns of Evidence. You mentioned that earlier. And so in Patterns of Evidence, you look at scientific and, the journey from the Exodus and Moses and the story and the scriptures. And you look at the validity of that and what does science say about that? And are these true stories and can they be trusted? So talk a little bit about then that same kind of approach that you took with this American Miracle. How did making Patterns of Evidence, and you've made 6 Patterns of Evidence films, I believe. Is that?
Yeah. Well, now it's 7, but going on 8.
So we've got 7 Patterns of Evidence films looking at the journey, to Mount Sinai and crossing the Red Sea and leaving Egypt. How did making Patterns of Evidence, how did that prepare you to make this film?
This film is a docudrama, but I wanted this to be heavy on drama, more drama than documentary. But how it prepared me was I had done quite a few dramatic scenes in the past and costumed and historical. And this one was the biggest I've ever been a part of. And I had to bring in other people. Doug Maddox is a part of this film, and he was producing all the dramatic areas. And then Ralph Augstros, he was there. We all were producing in that time period. It has a cast of about almost 90 actors that are in the film, as well as about 300 to 400 extras, because we actually have battle scenes, and we've got a variety of different crossing of the Delaware when Washington crossed it to attack Trenton. There's a lot of different scenes. We show a speech given by Daniel Webster at Faneuil Hall, and then there is at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. We show the whole story of the Constitution and how it comes into being. So there was a lot of it was a big film. A lot of the other ones I have made were in the Middle East. I'd go to Egypt or Jordan or Israel. I'd go to Jerusalem and different places like that. But this one was completely different. This one was up and down the East Coast where a lot of the activity were. We would go to the actual location where a battle would be. And for example, George Washington was in 1750. We actually used George Washington as the main storyline. We followed George's life through, and when he was a young man, he was in a battle of Monongahela. And in this battle, he was shot at multiple times and had bullet holes through his clothing. 2 horses were killed. His hat was shot off. And almost all the officers were killed or injured except for one, and that was George Washington. And so there was a providence that protected him. And by the way, as you saw in the movie, later on, a Native American a chief who was at that battle came up, met him when Washington was out surveying some land, and prophesied over him that he would be the leader of a great nation, and that he could not be killed in battle. So that's the type of film this is. It's an unforgotten, or I should say, it's a forgotten story.
And such a big scope. I mean, obviously working with you and going through all of the Patterns of Evidence films, being very familiar with all those films, those were big, going to all over the world. I looked at the credits, at the end credits. It looks like you went to like 12 or 15 different states. You're all over the United States. You're in England. And you've got horses, you've got boats, you've got ships, you've got cannons, you've got costumes and wigs and hundreds of people and so many actors. And just the scope of this was just, I was really taken just as a filmmaker, like, oh my goodness, how did you get any sleep? This looks like a really hard job. Talk about the scope and trying to manage that and how different that was for what you had done prior with Patterns of Evidence.
Well, one thing I really, at first I thought, I don't know that I can do this, but we had to have a team to break it down. I knew creatively I needed help. And so John Groders, and some say Gruders, and I'm not sure ever which is it.
It's John Groders. He told me Groders. I know John.
Groders.
Yeah, John's the best.
So John, I gave him the book, and he wrote the first draft, and then he read it for us, and it was like, yeah, that's it. And that was the beginning of how we were able to take a slice of the regular book and then turn that into what would become the film. And then from there we could see, well, we needed to add more storylines. The African American storylines that weren't in there. There were certain storylines about the crossing of the Delaware and Valley Forge that weren't in Michael's book. But when I would interview, so the film is made from telling that original John Groders script that came out of the book. Then we added more scenes, and then we added So when we first filmed it, all we had was drama, and I storyboarded 1,100 scenes. I mean, 1,100 shots, and I had a book of in the storyboard, and I made copies for everyone. Funny part is no one else would look at it except for me. And so, but it helped me to visualize the whole film. So I would know, well, I'm going to need exactly, I'm going to need, so many boats, so how many boats do we have? And as you said, there's, the ships and that was, practical ships that were filmed and storms that we had to create.
Horses,
Yeah, we had to get horses. We had to have firing we had to have gun safety because we're shooting, at each other with muskets, uh, you know, and then there was, stunts. We had to have stunt coordination. So
special
yeah,
effects, lots of special effects as well.
yeah, and then rain scenes. There's lots of different kinds of things on water. When they're crossing and making sure everybody's safe, that we're not going to have any accidents or anything like that. So there's a lot of safety issues. And then we're filming in historical locations. So the Battle of Monongahela is where the battle happened. So then we bring in reenactors and the natives. The Native Americans that are in this film are the actual descendants of the Native Americans that were in the battle. So we went to the actual tribe, and they're wearing the actual, historical paint. The paint is very, the clothing, the weapons, everything. The muskets were all to that time period. The clothing, everything. We had James Gallagher, our film historian, who is a part of this, and he did the show Turn. He did John Adams. He was with Spielberg on Lincoln, and that's his specialty, was to help you make sure that the socks that they're wearing are the right socks. That that the clothes, the dresses, the hats. It's huge. I love that though, because now we've created something that is actually accurate, and but more than that, it's profound in the fact that the film is really telling this forgotten story of these events that Michael Medved has been able to uncover and put them into this wonderful series of books. There's two books actually, and it takes us through many times throughout history where God, in a way, miraculously or supernaturally, either protected or provided for something in the future for America.
There was definitely a divine, design. And when
Yeah.
you look at how it was protected, and again, we're talking about the film The American Miracle in theaters June 9th, 10th, 11th, AmericanMiracleMovie.com. Just going to be a Fathom event, 3 nights.
Yes, it's called Fathom Entertainment now, but that's
Fathom, that's
correct,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
They changed it.
And tickets go on sale on May 4th, and we really need people to buy tickets early and buy many. Invite your friends because, Rick, wouldn't you say that I don't think there's ever been a movie like this before that tells these kinds of encouraging, inspiring stories that are historically, telling the story of our nation. And for those of you who might not know this, this coming year, next year, July 4th, not this one, but the one following that, is going to be our 250th anniversary
Wow.
of our nation. And so it's we're coming into a time to think back about how this all came together and really think about, well, what were the values? Why are we together as a nation? What constitutes us as a people?
Great questions. My wife was talking about just how good the costumes looked. Did some of the reenactors bring their own costumes, their own wardrobe?
Reenactors, that's the reason why they get chosen first, because they've got the costumes, I mean, to get costumes, we did rent costumes, and we had lots of, costuming going on. There are times when there was a huge group of makeup and costume people. The department was pretty big. And, but yes, the costumes are beautiful. And I think the other thing that's really nice about this is that there's quite a balance of people in telling the story. Uh, we even have when we think about the I just showed the film in Seattle to a group, and what they said was the way the women came out in the storyline. You know, Martha and Abigail Adams and Nicole C. Mullins plays Mumbet Freeman, and Nicole C. Mullins. I don't think she had really acted in anything like this, but she, the gospel singer, recording artist. She did an amazing job.
I thought she stood out. I thought her acting performance, if I was gonna, pick the winner, I really thought she stood out. The person you have doing George, the older George Washington, was great as well. But I was so just surprised watching Nicole C. Mullen become this character. It's obvious. This is not Nicole. She's the character, and really immersed herself in it. And I thought she did a great job.
She really did. She was, I didn't know. And it was a really, I use the word of God thing. She was singing at the National Religious Broadcasters, and I heard her, and Jane Bjork, who's our marketing manager, wanted to get a picture with her. And so she said, "Hey, take the picture." And so I ran with her up to the front. And when Nicole turned around, she said, "Oh, Mr. Mahoney." And I was like, how does Nicole C. Mullins know who I am? But apparently she had seen the Patterns of Evidence films at their church, and that's how she knew. And then as I was thinking about when we thought about adding some more characters, one morning it just seemed like, ask Nicole and see if she could play this role. Because it was a different time period when she knew me, and I think because she knew me and because she said, "Well, here's the role, here's what it would be." She thought and prayed about it and said, "Yeah, I want to do this. I really want to be in this role." And not only that, but she had written this song called "Freedom." This amazing song 25 years ago. She had written this song, and it really hadn't been released much. I mean, it really hadn't gone anywhere, and it turned out to be Michael Medved said it's one of the best movie closes, you could have in a movie,
Okay,
with
great.
her singing,
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and you kind of did a little music video there on set. I noticed that was kind of good,
yeah.
So you incorporated that at the end. Yeah, that's that again. It's so interesting. You're talking about God's providence. We see God's providence in the founding of our nation. We see God's providence, just the fact that we're America. That we even made it. That all of a sudden the fog came in, so they could, they were going to be killed by the English the next day, and it would be over. But the fog comes in, and they're able to get away. Or the snow is so bad, just over and over and over and over again. These providential, quote unquote, accidents happen, big quotes there, that enable us to have in America. And it's interesting that this little providential, you get Nicole C. Mullen, and she kind of steals the show. you know, she does. She's great.
We filmed the Independence Hall in Houston because the Houston Christian College University there, they built a Independence Hall so that they could preserve the understanding of it and the memory of it, and it had never been used. And the providence of that was that Jane Cook, who's in our film, said, because we went to the real Independence Hall, but it's very difficult to film there because of when you have to film in the middle of the night and all that. So we were able to go to the Houston Christian Independence Hall, and we found the window when the school was out for a couple of days, and we were able to film the scene with the Constitution being debated on one side, and on the other side was a courtroom. And I said, well, then let's film the courtroom scene, because the scenes of Cameron Arnett as Peter Salem and Nicole C. Mullen as Mumbet Freeman, those scenes were added after we were on the road. We were writing and adding, I don't think you've ever done that. Have you ever added to writing while you're making a movie?
And I know
Adding
you've
scene?
never done that before.
Yes, right, right. You hate to say it, but you go, I know more about it now. And as a filmmaker, you go, I know that what's missing, and I need to put this, this scene in here,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and everybody just has to trust you. And that, we have Rick Garside, who was our first AD, and he was like, I'm trying to plan all this. I said, well, I gave you a storyboard, and let's just figure out, how many, if we add these things, because I knew that the story needed it, because we would not be telling the full story unless we added it. But in the beginning, when you get a project like this, it all seems like, well, that's a lot of information, and do I really understand it myself? And do I understand how to tell that story? And Rick, this process was really an excellent one for me, because it felt like a lot of my past films experience came to bear, but then I sort of blossomed in, and I think God's providence was on it. There were things that happened and doors that opened. We were able to film inside of Mount Vernon, the house of George Washington, which I don't think that they've really allowed too many people to do that. And this, they told us, was the first time they ever had a motion picture film inside their Mount Vernon. You just realize that George Washington was here. And all these guests that from around the country and from Europe came to this home, and we're there. We're filming right there, and we were able to film at George Washington's desk. And I thought, you know, he sat here, and this. So you're going to get a sense and a feel that this is where George Washington was, and we didn't make a set. We were there on that location. So being in these places, being in the place of Faneuil Hall, where Daniel Webster gives the 50th anniversary address about the death of Jefferson and Adams, we were there in all these historical places. It's like when I was making films about the Bible and being in Jerusalem, or being, in these different locations, you realize, well, this was where it happened. There's something special about that.
So how long did it take to make the film?
The film was shot. We went to a reenactment in June of 23, and then we ended up then filming starting in like August, and filmed through August, September, and October, November, December. But we didn't film all the time. But we were going up and down the eastern seaboard to the different. There are plantation homes from the past that are still here. There, for example, we filmed in Thomas Jefferson's childhood home. I think it's called Ten. I won't try, but it's something like Tancucket or something like that. We went to these different homes, and we were able to film scenes inside there because they have the high ceilings and the walls, and they've got it furnished very well. And as we made our way through those different homes and settings, I think there's 3 of those plantation mansions that we went to. And then we would head off to, like we did the battle scene. We actually started with the very first day of filming was a large battle scene with hundreds of, people involved. We had the natives coming and attacking, and the French coming, and then we had young George Washington and horses. And, to start your first day of filming with one of your bigger scenes was not typical, but it was just the way it was. We were there. There was the time that it had to happen. And it was actually, I think, filmed, I'm not positive about this, but almost at the same time in history as when the actual event happened. So there's a number, I'm not positive, but I think that might have been the case. Anyway, there's a lot of locations that we went to that so we pretty much got it from the time of, let's say, is it Labor Day, all the way through till about, December. We filmed then in Minnesota to do Valley Forge, thinking for sure we would get snow. And we have not had much snow in the last several years. And so we couldn't find snow. Anywhere. Yeah, I was going to try to buy snow, and we couldn't even buy snow because other people didn't have snow. Those snow making machines were somewhere else.
How did you do the snow? What'd you do?
Well, special effects.
Okay.
We did special effects snow, and uh, well, like when we went to the crossing of the Delaware, we we had one ship, and it was the original, long. It's probably about 40 or 50 feet long. It's big, and I had a large green screen that I had uh, purchased, and it was 12 feet by 40, I think it was, and we had to extend that, and then we put the reenactors on that ship, and then we had it sideways, and we filmed scenes that way, and we would move the camera sideways, and then we would move this way, and we shot wide and close, and then we did angle shots.
So,
Uh,
okay. So kind of done special effects wise, trying to,
yeah,
we don't have snow. We're going to do what we can. But it's so amazing as far as the locations and the desk and the furniture and the hall and the courtroom. It looked so authentic, because
they are
you were filming in the authentic locations in
right.
much of that.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, exactly. They were historical locations or recreations to exact definition of what everything was. That's what I think. It's a beautiful film. I've watched it a number of times, now if we talk about the scholars that are in it, the debate was should you have scholars or shouldn't you have scholars? But I think that um, Michael's hosting it, Michael Medved, and he takes us along. But why the scholars, in my opinion, are necessary is because you would not believe this was true, or you would not understand the depth of the truth of it. So I think that the knife cuts deeper into our heart, into our thoughts, into our mind, by having Robert George from Princeton, explain to you, about the nature of man, because the founders knew that men were made in the image of God, and so there was this dignity to men, but then they also had fallen nature, and there was the depravity of man. And so this dignity of having rights and liberties that need to be elevated, combined with the fact that we have a sinful nature, when you
Hmm.
understand those two things, that changes the way you construct a government then, because you don't want to give too much power to any one group of people or person. That's why there were the separation of powers. Whereas if you had a king, he controlled everything. He could do whatever he wanted. If he was in a bad mood that day, look out. Off with their heads, as they say, you know.
Well, I liked the scholars. I did. You had Joseph Ellis on there. I was surprised to see him. I'll tell you who I was surprised to see was Richard Dreyfuss, the Academy Award winning actor. He came on, but then later in the film started talking about his love for America and how we are losing what America was. And I was going, whoa. So there was really a nice, as the movie ended, it did transition a little bit from what was happening, in the founding of our country to kind of some of the issues we're facing today,
Hmm.
and the importance of us to remember. So those dots were being connected. I thought that was, for me, one of the more powerful parts of the film was where you're connecting. You're giving us a so what.
Yeah,
Here's what happened with. Here's this, but why is this important? And then you make sure we understand why this is important
absolutely.
for us to realize. And I thought that was great. And then seeing Stephen Meyer, who, I'm used to seeing him talk about biology and creation and design and Darwin's Doubt and the other great books that he's written. Then to see him talk about history, American history, that was great. I loved seeing him in there
Yeah,
because he's one of my favorites.
yeah.
But
He did a wonderful job. In fact, it was really a nice, if you think musically, you think about the harmonies that were being sung in that Richard Dreyfuss and Robert George and Joe Ellis and Stephen Meyer and Michael Medved, they're harmonizing. There's a harmony that comes into play, and you go, I haven't heard this harmony before. And then you go back, and what I could see, Rick, was that there has been some intentionality to change the history of these people by new media that's come out, and they've stripped out their the God part of these characters' lives, and what they spoke about, what they read, or what they had written. They were very much like Benjamin Franklin. We had an amazing Benjamin Franklin, character, and he was just fantastic. But we don't realize that Benjamin Franklin actually calls for prayer during the convention.
I had never heard that.
Yeah,
That's so interesting how that got left out of the history that I learned
of
and the
course.
history that we talk about when we talk about Benjamin Franklin,
Yeah,
to see how much of a man of faith he was at the end of his life. You hear about some of his wayward movements when he was younger, and that's kind of like what we focus on. But towards the latter part of his life, we don't hear about what a strong man of faith he was, and his call to the Congress, to the leaders, to prayer. Hey guys, we need to be praying every day. Wow. I'd never heard that. So
yeah,
again, so I learned things through this that, and so that's the importance of having this, being able to communicate things that you probably won't hear in school, but are true, but it doesn't fit the narrative of a teachers union or whatever the powers that be that are controlling curriculum these days. And hope, maybe things will be changing with that in the years to come. I'm just curious, how'd you get Richard Dreyfuss? How'd that happen?
in this whole journey, I what would happen was I would ask Michael. I said, Michael, who do you know? Who do you think we could talk with? And he goes, well, I know Richard Dreyfuss, and so he gave us the name of Richard's agent, and Richard's agent gave us his phone number, how to reach him, and left a message, and then got able to reconnect with Richard, and it's one of those interesting opportunities. So then we set a time. He had to read the script and see if he liked it, and he felt there's too much God in Michael's work, and he didn't appreciate that. And so when I made the film, you might see this. I gave some alternative explanations. Well, how did all these unusual things happen? Well, maybe it's just that they were lucky,
Right,
or
right. Oh, it was
you know,
just luck. Right.
yeah. Or maybe it's just that Washington knew when not to fight.
Uh-huh.
Is there any divine aspect in it? Well, you can be judge of that, and that's an
Right.
opinion that some people have. But they continue, these providential,
Oh yeah.
unusual things keep continuing on and on and on. And by the way, we didn't write about all of them. There was times when things happened. There's so many that if you documented them all, they're quite substantial. Even during the Revolutionary War, there's a time when a tornado came out of nowhere and just threw the British, uh, artillery and everything everywhere. And then it disappeared. It just came out of nowhere, and people couldn't believe, well, what was going on? And it's like they said, even Joe Ellis says, even the British were saying, this is odd. This isn't normal. Seems like God is fighting for them. And I wrote a thinker update for this week, and it really talks about the seal of America, what it was going to be.
Tell us about Thinker Update. What is that? Help us understand what that is.
If you go to patternsofevidence.com, you can sign up for thinkers. We have these weekly thinkers that come out. And a thinker is an article about a pattern of evidence of God in archaeology or the Bible. We basically show every week there's like almost 500 thinker articles out right now. And this latest one is showing the connection between God acting in the history of the Bible, as well as God acting in modern history with the nation of America. And this pattern, Franklin had an idea for the seal of America, and it was going to be the symbol of Moses with his hands up in the water parting, and the Israelites, escaping the wrath of Pharaoh. And they saw the connection of deliverance the Israelites had from Pharaoh and the deliverance of the colonial, the states from the King of England, King George. They saw him as being like a pharaoh, a tyrant. And in fact, there was a model. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was something like, fighting tyrants is loyalty to God or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, but
Mm,
they saw this connection there. Thomas Jefferson thought that the seal should be the pillar of fire in the desert leading the Israelites through the wilderness, you know. So you don't hear that. So what ends up happening, I think, is that we have a lot of narratives that are going on that are not completely telling you the real character of these people. And it doesn't mean that they were perfect. And I think that what
right.
Robert George says is he says the principles of the Constitution are noble. And it's the principles that are right, but we don't practice them always, and we fall short of them, and we sin. And so it's not that the principles are wrong, it's that the people haven't been able to live up to those principles.
Right. Yeah. And I thought that it was a great at the end where you talked about what would happen if there was no America. What would happen if at any given moment there are dozens and dozens of opportunities for America to not exist? That some weird storm comes, some weird tornado, some weird literal act of God happens that keeps America on track. What would happen if there was no America? What would happen in World War II if there was no America? What Ellis Island? Where would people go who are leaving from persecution? And what would happen to Christianity if there was no America, where you had a state that you had to bow to and you couldn't worship freely? I mean, that's a movie in itself right there. Just examining what would the world be like if there was no America. So, not that, we're heaven, we're not heaven on earth, that's for sure, but we're broken. But great questions, great things that you brought up in it. So what are your hopes for the film? What are you wanting to see happen?
Well, I believe it's an important film, and why? Because I think what I've learned is that they stopped teaching. My understanding is, across the nation, for the last 50 years, they don't teach civics anymore. So there's almost a sense that most people don't understand what our nation is about, where it came from. They don't know about the founding. And when you don't know about that, you don't understand why it was created the way it was. And I think that there's a lesson to be learned in this film. And what I tried to do is to make it so that you could learn that lesson in a short 2-hour span, so that you would understand what basically happened. That's why the film takes you through from about 1750 all the way up to 1826. It takes you through this basic understanding of what the main points are that were the reasons why we were in a revolution. Why did we seek freedom? What were we looking for? And that basis of this battle, when they got done with it, they were able to write a document. It started with the Declaration of Independence, where they said, "Hey, we hold these truths self-evident. That we are created by a creator, and we have certain rights. Of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Well, that began before, during the war, in the very beginning, on July 4th, 1776. And then they have the development of the Constitution. And between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that's really the fabric of which America holds itself together. And what Robert George would say is that constitutes us. In other words, it makes us come together so you can have black, white, Asian, young, old, Irish, English, Italian, Native American, all people living in a nation.
A big state, a small state.
Yeah, all coming together to basically have this fabric that constitutes us as a nation. And I think that civility, for example, and I think that reason why that's important is that there is a law that's higher than man's law, and it's God's law.
Right.
I think John Adams talked about the fact that you have to be a moral people in order to live this way.
Hmm.
And I think I think for me, it made me want to be a better citizen. And I had a much better understanding about the separation of powers. I understand about basic rights and the fact that men have a dignity to them and a depravity to them. And most of us, when we look at another people, we sometimes only see the depravity. But what God wants us to see is the dignity in them. And I think what's happening a lot of times is all the people that look at each other that don't like that other group only see the depravity or what they think is depravity in those people. And they do not appreciate the dignity. And what the goal is that you see the dignity and the depravity and you try to work out this relationship so that you can live together as a people.
Well, it's a film the whole family can go see. It's The American Miracle in theaters June 9th, 10th, 11th. On May 4th, may the 4th be with you. May the 4th of May have you go buy some tickets. And you can get information on a theater near you by going to AmericanMiracleMovie.com. And Tim, what a blessing. It was great seeing your wife, Jill, in the film, and your grandson, and, seeing some familiar faces that I know. It was like, there's Jill. I love it. It was great. She did a great job in it too. And, looking forward to the film coming out and, final words. What do you want to leave us with?
I think that if people could show this film to their family, anyone who's, like under 50 years old hasn't heard any of this. This is the forgotten story of America. And it's a story, I think, that's timely, as a warning that this America that we have has reasons why it became this way and how it can stay this way, in a sense. Otherwise, we could lose our nation. Things could happen in other countries like Russia and other parts of the world where people forgot about God. And this film is really about God. It's that God has given us a wonderful place to live, and it's our job to basically know how we got here and participate in keeping it that way for our children and our grandchildren. So that's why American Miracle, Our Nation Is No Accident, is a timely film for right now. And thanks for having me on, Rick.
Oh, what a pleasure. Always great to see you, Tim. And, thank you for being on the show. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.